On this channel, we've covered a lot of ships that started out looking one way and ended up somewhere totally different. Often, these are your average, straightforward refits from when ships changed hands between owners, but others are driven by desperation and even disaster. In this episode, we'll look at 4 more mind-blowing ship makeovers that resulted in some seriously weird Frankenstein's monster-like vessels. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs, and here are 4 more absolutely wild ship makeovers from history. Number 4. USS Wolverine, SS Seeandbee. If I told you that the US Navy at one point boasted some paddle-wheeled aircraft carriers, you'd probably think I was insane. And fair enough too, but it is completely true. This bizarre ship originally began life as a luxurious passenger steamer before it underwent an extraordinary metamorphosis into a training aircraft carrier during World War II. The story of the USS Wolverine begins with its original incarnation as the SS Seeandbee, a grand passenger steamer launched in November 1912 by the Detroit Shipbuilding Company in Michigan. Named using the initials of its owners, the Cleveland and Buffalo Transit Company, Seeandbee, the Seeandbee, and how creative is that, boasted accommodations for over 1,500 passengers. At 500 feet in length and with a 58-foot beam, it was among the largest and most opulent passenger steamers on the Great Lakes and was, in fact, the largest sidewheel steamer in the world at the time. A fact that would come in very handy in the future. She boasted an impressive array of amenities, including staterooms that could accommodate over 1,500 passengers, elegant dining saloons, and spacious promenade decks, setting new standards for comfort and luxury on the freshwater lake voyages. In fact, the decision to use old-fashioned inclined steam engines was actually inspired by passengers who wanted a good night's sleep on board. Those engines created less vibration and meant a more comfortable trip for passengers. She was an impressive, quirky ship to be sure, and the SS Seeandbee served the Great Lakes region for over 2 decades. But the outbreak of World War II caused a massive shift in priorities for the United States Merchant Marine, with the nation's resources redirected towards the war effort. The Navy, in particular, faced the challenge of training a rapidly expanding pool of naval aviators with limited access to aircraft carriers. Hardly any could be spared for training duties because they were already in action over in the Pacific. Now, in response to this pressing need, the Navy sought innovative solutions to expand its training capabilities without diverting active carriers from the front line. The clever solution came in the form of repurposing existing ships into freshwater training carriers, and remarkably, the SS Seeandbee was acquired by the Navy in March 1942 and underwent a radical transformation. Her impressive length and beam made her an ideal platform for use as an aircraft carrier, and the Navy workers got to work. Her luxurious accommodations and superstructure were removed, and in their place a flat-top flight deck was installed, along with a small island superstructure. She was fitted with the required arresting cables that would seize landing aircraft, and it was reported by the Buffalo Courier Express that 45 miles of welding and 45,000 bolts went into her. Commissioned as the USS Wolverine, because Michigan is known as the Wolverine State, in August 1942, the vessel became one of 2 freshwater aircraft carriers alongside the USS Sable, tasked with training naval aviators in carrier takeoffs and landings. In fact, Sable had once been a sidewheel steamer too, the SS Greater Buffalo. The choice of the Great Lakes for these operations was strategic. It offered a safe, controlled environment away from the threat of enemy submarines, and allowed for nearly year-round training operations, albeit somewhat limited by winter ice. It was also a question of convenience and making the least impact on Navy resources. If training on the open ocean, then an escort force of destroyers would be needed too every time they left port. Operating primarily out of Chicago alongside USS Sable, the Wolverine played a crucial role in training thousands of Navy pilots. The 2 unusual ships came to be known as the Corn Belt Fleet. These aviators would go on to play a pivotal role in the Navy's aerial campaigns in the Pacific, contributing significantly to the Allied victory. The training operations aboard the Wolverine were not without challenges though. This included navigating the unpredictable weather of the Great Lakes and accommodating the limitations imposed by the vessel's original design. They weren't real aircraft carriers after all. There were no hangars or elevators or anything like that. Plus, the ships weren't fast enough to create adequate wind conditions required for safe landings, so on calm days, operations had to be halted. Despite these hurdles, the Wolverine and her sister ship, the Sable, provided invaluable service in preparing naval aviators for the rigours of carrier operations. The USS Wolverine was decommissioned on November 7th, 1945, shortly after the end of World War II. It had been an unusual end to such a unique ship, but Seeandbee had served her country well and was scrapped after a successful 3-decade-long, unusual career, which really is not too bad at all. Number 3, the SS Suevic. Now, some ship makeovers are thanks to wartime necessities, like the Seeandbee becoming USS Wolverine, but others are down to unexpected catastrophes. Take, for example, the incredible SS Suevic, a ship that was wrecked and only saved when it was cut in half and then joined back together. The SS Suevic was part of the White Star Line's fleet, designed for the booming emigrant and cargo trade out to Australia from Britain in the early 1900s. Launched in December 1900, the vessel was one of the Jubilee-class steamships, which included her sister ships Afric, Medic, Runic, and Persic. These were quite simple, utilitarian ships with as much focus on cargo as their human trade. They displaced around 12,500 tons and measured some 550 feet in length. The Suevic was equipped with the then latest maritime technology, and she was powered by triple expansion steam engines. She offered accommodations for 320 passengers in steerage and could carry up to 7,500 tons of cargo, including refrigerated meat from Australia and New Zealand back to Britain, and up to 20,000 bales of the very well-regarded Australian wool. The most defining moment in the SS Suevic's career came on March 17, 1907. While returning from Melbourne to Liverpool under the command of Captain Thomas Jones, the Suevic encountered heavy seas and drizzling rain off the coast of Cornwall, England. Now, this is a particularly notorious stretch of water, and the Cornish coast has claimed many ships. And sure enough, despite efforts to navigate those nasty conditions, the crew was unable to take an accurate reading on their position, and the ship struck a reef near the Lizard Peninsula, grounding at full speed firmly onto the rocks. Now, the ship was stuck fast, but there was still the risk she could be dislodged and sunk. So the 520-odd passengers and crew aboard were safely evacuated by the ship's lifeboats and rescued by nearby lifeboat stations. The successful evacuation, with no loss of life using 4 open-top lifeboats over 16 hours, was nothing more than a miracle and an incredibly brave display from the rescue crews. Now, White Star Line was left with the useless hulk of its stranded ship, and attempts to run the engines astern to take her off the rocks proved futile because the bow, or forwardmost section of the ship, was stuck fast. It was soon realised that if the ship could be lightened somehow, then the tide would float it clean off the rocks. So cargo was removed, but it still wasn't enough. The Liverpool and Glasgow Salvage Association began to hatch a wild plan. They knew that the rear 400 feet of the ship's length was undamaged and completely fine. If the bow section could be removed, then the stern could be floated off and saved. The decision was made to cut off the damaged forward section and save the remainder of the vessel. The bizarre operation commenced in the spring of 1907, with workers using explosives to separate the damaged forward section from the rest of the ship. Once separated, the aft section, containing the engines and the majority of the undamaged structure, was refloated at high tide. And remarkably, Suevic was able to actually steam under her own power and missing her entire bow section into Southampton. The original bow was left behind on the rocks, and it was broken up by the heavy seas. Harland and Wolff, Suevic's original builders, received a strange emergency order, a new 210-foot or 65-metre bow section to be built and then towed to Southampton from Belfast for grafting back onto Suevic's forlorn stern section. The company hurriedly got to work, and just a few months later, in October 1907, the new bow section got its own launching ceremony before going under tow for reattachment at Southampton. Observers wryly reported that with her bow at Belfast and her stern 316 miles or 508 kilometres away in Southampton, this made Suevic the world's longest ship. The bow section arrived by the end of October and was fitted to the original stern section over 3 months. In January 1908, less than a year after the original accident, Suevic was put back into service, an incredible effort, and what was then the largest salvage and ship rebuilding effort yet undertaken. Suevic returned to service looking more or less the same as she had originally done, but the reconstructing and grafting of the bow section surely has to qualify as a truly extreme kind of ship makeover. Number 2. HMS Courageous. Now, the USS Wolverine was a very impressive conversion job, but the need for aircraft carriers was so great before the Second World War that even the famed British battlecruisers were not immune from similar conversion jobs. Enter the Courageous class. Once the epitome of British naval technology, they would swap their guns for a flight deck and emerge unrecognisable as fast aircraft carriers. HMS Courageous was laid down in March 1915 and commissioned into the Royal Navy the next year. She was designed by the naval architect Sir Eustace Tennyson d'Eyncourt. The vessel was actually part of an innovative new class of large light cruisers intended to hunt down enemy raiders, protect convoys and scout for large, friendly fleets. Displacing over 19,000 tons and armed with 4 15-inch guns and just 2 twin turrets, Courageous and her sister ships were a departure from traditional battlecruiser design because a mid-war limitation had been placed on building anything larger than a light cruiser. During World War I, Courageous served in the North Sea, participating in patrols and operations designed to maintain Britain's naval dominance. However, her career as a battlecruiser was relatively uneventful, with very few opportunities to actually engage in the surface combat for which it was originally designed. The end of the war, and the subsequent Washington Naval Treaty of 1922, was aimed at preventing an arms race by limiting naval construction, and it set the stage for her dramatic transformation. The interwar period was marked by significant shifts in naval doctrine, with the airplane emerging as a crucial element of war at sea. Recognising the potential of aircraft for reconnaissance, strike and defence in the ocean, the Royal Navy sought to expand its carrier fleet, and quickly. HMS Courageous and her sister ship HMS Glorious were both selected for conversion into aircraft carriers in 1924 because their unusual design made them true black sheep in the post-war British fleet. That aside, they were very long ships for their tonnage class, around 786 feet or 239 metres, and their powerful geared turbines gave the sister ships an impressive top speed of 32 knots, both very attractive qualities for fast aircraft carriers. Not only that, but the concept had already kind of been tested. HMS Furious was meant to have been the third Courageous-class battlecruiser, but she was instead modified midway through construction as an aircraft carrier with a crewed flying off-deck and hangar. Courageous's conversion would be much more thorough. Like Seeandbee, the work involved extensive modifications to Courageous's structure and her armament. Her main battery guns were removed, and a flight deck was constructed running the length of the ship. Hangars, lifts and aviation fuel storage facilities were added to accommodate and operate the aircraft. The transformation also included the installation of an impressive battery of anti-aircraft guns to defend against enemy aerial attacks, and by the time of her recommissioning as an aircraft carrier in 1928, Courageous could carry up to 48 airplanes, which was a very impressive amount for the late 1920s. Of course, she was nearly completely unrecognisable from the handsome battlecruiser that she'd originally been. Before the Second World War, Courageous played an important role in training British crews in the peculiarities of carrier operations. She participated in exercises that tested and refined the Royal Navy's approach to carrier-based warfare, including the use of aircraft for fleet reconnaissance, air defence, and strike operations against enemy surface targets. Despite their contributions to the advancement of British naval aviation, HMS Courageous and HMS Glorious's wartime careers would not be happy ones. On 17th of September 1939, just weeks after the war had begun, Courageous was torpedoed and sunk by the German submarine U-29 while on patrol in the Atlantic Ocean. The loss of the ship and 519 of her crew was a stark reminder of the vulnerability of capital ships to submarines. Glorious suffered an even more violent end. She was caught up with by the German battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau and all but shot to pieces, with 1,200 men lost. The ships had unorthodox careers to be sure, and interestingly it would not be the last time that a battlecruiser or battleship was converted for use as an aircraft carrier, highlighting the strange, almost fluid nature of design at the time when Navy engineers were forced to comply with strict regulations and make do with anything that they had. There's been a bit of an unexpected theme to this video so far. That's ships that were aircraft carriers that probably shouldn't have been, and franken-ships that were stitched together from random parts. Well, to end the list, we have one more franken-ship for you, but unlike Suevic, this franken-ship was made up of two separate vessels which were joined together to create something new entirely. The destroyer, HMS Zubian. The story of HMS Zubian begins with the separate tales of HMS Nubian and HMS Zulu, both tribal-class destroyers that entered service in the early 1900s. These ships were part of the Royal Navy's efforts to bolster its destroyer fleet in response to the growing naval arms race with Germany leading up to World War I. The tribal class were designed for speed and firepower, intended to counter the threat of enemy destroyers and smaller vessels. HMS Nubian was launched in 1909, and HMS Zulu followed in the same year. Both ships saw extensive service in the early years of World War I, participating in patrols, escort duties, and engagements in the English Channel and the North Sea. However, their careers both took dramatic turns in 1916. HMS Nubian suffered severe damage to her bow from a torpedo during the Battle of the Dover Strait in October 1916. In fact, it was nearly completely blown off, and when she ran aground under tow, it did finally separate, leaving her stern section, like the Suevics, aground but undamaged. Around the same time, HMS Zulu lost her entire stern section to a mine off Dunkirk. Now, both ships' severed bow and stern sections were towed respectively to Chatham Dockyard, where some bright spark hatched a scheme. In an extraordinary decision, driven by the urgencies of war and the shortage of naval vessels, the Royal Navy opted to combine the undamaged bow of the Zulu and the intact stern section of the Nubian. Shipbuilders undertook the challenging project of joining the disparate sections into a single operational vessel, despite the fact there was a difference in beam or width between the two ships of 89mm or 3.5 inches. This process involved extensive modifications to ensure structural integrity and especially seaworthiness. Now, the work was actually completed in a remarkably short time, and in February 1917, a brand new destroyer steamed out for service in the Channel. In what can only be described as a good old-fashioned bit of British wartime humour, the ship was officially named HMS Zubian, a combination of Zulu and Nubian, which incidentally was a move that very hilariously confused the German Admiralty, who had no intelligence around a ship of that name ever existing or being under construction at all. Despite her patchwork origins, Zubian was as capable as her predecessors, ready to serve in the Royal Navy's ongoing effort to secure control of the seas. She was assigned to the Dover Patrol, a critical unit responsible for securing the English Channel against German U-boats, mines, and surface raiders. The Dover Patrol played a vital role in protecting cross-channel shipping, laying minefields and attempting to block German submarine access to the Atlantic. One of Zubian's most notable contributions came in November 1917, when she successfully sank the German submarine UC-50 with a depth charge. It was an unlikely victory from a ship that shouldn't have existed in the first place, and Zubian had proved a rare success. After the war, Zubian was scrapped, having been worked very hard for the last 2 years, but her story still stands as one of the most bizarre and unexpectedly successful ship makeovers of all time. Ladies and gentlemen, it's your friend Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel because we get new videos out weekly. If you want to support my work and get really cool perks like behind the scenes and early access, please visit my Patreon in the link in the description below, or sign up as a YouTube member. Come and join the crew. And as always, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you again next time.